How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the channel. In today's episode, we'll do some side-by-side comparisons of Tangzhong and Yudane and see how they stack up. Let's go to the kitchen and have a closer look. Tangzhong and Yudane are both dough improvers, added to bread dough to make it softer, lighter, and stay fresher for longer. They are both made with flour and hot liquid. The Tangzhong is cooked, the Yudane is just mixed. One comes from China, one comes from Japan. I mistakenly used to think that Tangzhong was Japanese. It's the other way around. Their purpose and use is exactly the same, but the preparation is slightly different. Tangzhong is a cooked paste of flour and liquid, usually made at a 1:5 or 1:4 ratio. The Yudane, on the other hand, has more of a dough consistency. It is made by mixing flour and boiling water at a 1:1 ratio. In today's video, we'll compare them side by side. I will show you how to make them, how to use them, and how to convert any recipe to this method. If you've ever had any questions about these dough improvers, this video will surely answer them. We'll do two side-by-side comparisons today. In the first one, we'll use each dough improver in a way that it would commonly be used, so bear with me as I go over this. The Tangzhong will be on the left, the Yudane will be on the right. Normally I would use Tangzhong for milk bread, and this will be cooked in a pot, so that's why I have milk and flour in front of me here. The Yudane is made with boiling water, that's why on the right side we have water and flour. Of course I wanted to keep the rest of the ingredients equal, for a more fair comparison. That's why in the main part of the dough for the Tangzhong you see water and milk in the Yudane dough. This ensures that the amounts of ingredients in both recipes are exactly the same. I do hope that made some sense. The second test will be slightly different to this one, but that's for later on in the video. Let's just start by making these improvers. First up, the Tangzhong. In a small pan, combine the milk and the flour. Then take a spatula or a whisk and give it a quick mix, and bring it over to the stove. It needs to be cooked on medium heat for around 3 to 5 minutes. As the temperature goes up, the starches in the flour start to gelatinize. The mix starts thickening as the starches swell up and absorb the milk. And as soon as it becomes a paste like this, it's ready. You don't have to cook it any longer. All we need to do now is cool it down completely, and then we can use it. So making it takes about 5 minutes, cooling it down can take at least half an hour, and this little bit of work will improve the dough greatly. I'll cover this up and leave it on the side. Let's make the Yudane. In a small bowl, combine the flour and the boiling water. Mix everything well until there's no more dry flour left. Mixing the flour and water also gelatinizes the starches. This isn't quite cooking, it's more like scalding, but it does achieve a very similar result. Note the texture is completely different, and this also must be covered up and left to cool down completely. You can make both of them even a day ahead of time. And here they are side by side. Tangzhong on the left, Yudane on the right. And if you ever wondered how to make them, this is it, there's nothing else to it. And the use of them both is exactly the same as well. You simply add them into the mix when making your dough, and you'll get instant results. And from here on out, I'm not really going to talk you through these recipes. There is a written recipe in the link below the video, which will be for the second set of experiments that we'll do. Those two loaves will be better than these two. Here I just wanted to show you how to make the Yudane Tangzhong and how to use them. So instead of talking you through the steps of this recipe, I'll talk about the specifics of these improvers and some things that you might need to look out for when using them. So as I mentioned earlier, the main purpose of cooking the flour or mixing it with boiling water is the gelatinization of the starches in the flour. Starch will begin gelatinizing at 65 degrees Celsius, will swell up and absorb the liquid. That's why the mix becomes thick. And because the starches swell up, they're able to retain water a lot better. When bread is staling, it's partly because it's losing moisture, so using an improver like this helps the bread retain more water and stay fresher and moister for longer. That's the most basic principle behind it. It also makes the bread rise higher and get a more fluffy texture, and that's because we are taking part of the flour and cooking it, which means that that part of the flour will not have much gluten strength in it, as we essentially degrade it. That results in a looser, more stretchy dough. It's the kind of dough that will rise higher and puff up better. Now a quick note on temperature control. I mentioned earlier that you can refrigerate these dough improvers, so if you're using them cold, they will lower the dough temperature. So if your kitchen is pretty cool, you might want to take them out the fridge, leave them to warm up a little bit before using them. Alternatively, in summer, when it's hot, use them cold. They'll work wonders in keeping the dough temperature down. But how much flour should you use in each? That's where this experiment is different from the second one. Tangzhong would normally be made with 4 to 10% of the total flour in the dough. Yudane goes between 10 to 25%, although you can make it with all the flour in the recipe, as I demonstrated in my tortilla video. My goal for this first experiment was to make both improvers and have them at the same weight. They weighed 100 grams each. Now in the second experiment, instead of using the same amount of improver, we used the same amount of flour, which will make for a more fair comparison. As you can see, the Tangzhong is taking its time here. I think that first dough came out a little bit cooler. And back to the amounts for a second. Since the Tangzhong is made at a 1:5 to 1:4 ratio, there is a limit to how much flour you can use from the recipe to make it, because at one point all the liquid of the recipe will end up in the Tangzhong. Another thing to consider is evaporation, but we'll get to that after we have a closer look at these two. As you saw, the Tangzhong loaf took its time to rise. I just left it for longer. Now these came out the oven 24 hours ago. I ran out of time to film the other day. As you can see, they're still nice and soft and springy. I mean, from the outside, they look pretty much the same, right? And in the middle, it's also a very similar story. I was actually quite surprised at this point. I thought that there would be a bigger difference between them. But tearing is one thing. Let's slice them in half. Yes, the Yudane gained more volume because it was rising more rapidly. But looking at them and feeling them side by side, they are pretty much the same. Remember, these loaves are 24 hours old. They are still nice and tender, still nice and moist. The Tangzhong contained about 7% of the total flour, whilst the Yudane was made with 20% of the total flour. But that's enough for this experiment. Let's try something more interesting. I think the second experiment will be the far better comparison. We're not using any milk this time, and both improvers this time contain the same amount of flour. The Tangzhong is made with a ratio of 1 to 4.5. Yudane is still 1 to 1, of course. That's why there's only a little bit of water left in the main dough for the Tangzhong bread. Almost all of it was used in Tangzhong. And we only managed to use 13% of the total flour. You can find all the written details for these two recipes in the link below the video. So I'm not going to talk you through all the steps here. What I will talk about is one important point. If you want to achieve correct hydration in your dough, you must consider evaporation. This is especially true for the Tangzhong. As you cook it in a pan, it evaporates quite a lot of liquid. I've adjusted this in the recipe. I've added 10 extra grams of liquid to the Tangzhong. And coincidentally, that's exactly the same amount that evaporated. Now that was just an educated guess on my part. And unfortunately, I don't think there's a formula for it. Since every cooker is different, every pan is different, the amount that you're making will vary. So I don't think there's a reliable way of calculating the evaporation. The best thing you can do is weigh the Tangzhong after cooking. You know exactly how much flour and liquid it contains. So whatever is missing, you just add back into the main dough. That'll be the simplest, most effective solution. So we have spoken about how to make them, how to use them, and all the little considerations around it. How do you actually convert a recipe to be made with a Tangzhong or Yudane? You use the given percentages and the ratios. All you need to do is understand baker's percentage. If you are subscribed to this channel, you probably do already. So decide which of the improvers you want to use. That will give you the ratio of flour and liquid. From there you can see how much flour and liquid is available in your recipe. Choose a percentage of flour, deduct it from the total dough, then calculate the amount of water, then deduct that from the main dough, and then make your dough improver. The rest will be history. Be sure to account for temperature control and evaporation, and with that, you should be able to make any bread with one of these. Off the top of my head right now, I can't even imagine a bread that you couldn't make with this method. Wheat bread, that is. Usually these improvers are used in breads alongside eggs and fat, both of which also are dough improvers in a sense. But just the flour paste alone works wonders. So it is a great alternative to eggs and fat. And yeah, I mean, look at these two. That's more like it. This is why the written recipe is for these two loaves, not the first two. They are incredibly light, soft and springy. And for some reason the Tangzhong was still fermenting more slowly than the Yudane. Maybe because the dough was a little bit tighter. But let's see what they look like once we cut them. You know, I always want to tear this bread. I never want to cut it. It's just so satisfying. And yes, that's more like it. Look at that softness. Again, they are both very similar, but the Yudane one is just a little bit lighter and softer. Yudane is still on the right, Tangzhong is on the left, and they have been throughout the whole video. Now I know exactly which one I will be using from now on. I don't think there is any advantage to the Tangzhong. The Yudane is easier to make, it's quicker to make, there's less washing up, and it has produced a lighter result consistently. The only thing is that I can't explain why, but this is proof enough for me, so I'm going to keep using it. And they taste exactly the same as well. Maybe my palate is not as refined, but I could not taste any difference between them. But what about keeping quality? Maybe one of them will make the bread stay fresher for longer, So I decided to leave the other halves of the loaves for 24 hours. And here they are, still nice and bouncy. They have developed some wrinkles, but they're still nice and soft. But let's slice them in half and have a closer look at the inside. I think they have staled at the same rate. The Yudane was softer to begin with, and it's still softer now. To be honest, bread never lasts more than 24 hours in my house, but using these improvers is certainly a good way to make it stay fresher for longer. So what do you think these results? Which dough improver is your favorite? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click right here. Subscribe to the channel, click over here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.